Hey everyone, Mulligan here, and welcome to the Hooru portion of my legendary crafting guide. As always, if you're new to the game or just getting into constructed, you're probably wondering what legendaries you need to craft first. This series is aimed towards answering that question for you. Because of that, each video will focus on a single two-color faction. I try to be as informative as possible with the cards I talk about, since I feel that going fairly in depth and giving a little history on how they've been used in different metagames will help you guys just starting out that want to focus on crafting legendaries for a particular deck. Hooru is probably the least developed faction as far as archetypes go at this time, so this video will be a bit looser as far as cards that show up in this guide. It will also have a similar format to the Combrei and Stonescar guides. I'll just be talking about essential legendaries, which you should always craft first, and then the optional legendaries, which are cards that occasionally find their way into some decks, but are usually metagame dependent. I'll still mention what decks each legendary on this list typically finds a home in, and talk about a few cards to keep an eye on as the metagame develops. Any legendary I don't mention is either highly experimental, doesn't fit the general game plan of a particular deck, or is just plain bad. Let's get into it. So let's start off with the essential legendaries, and there's actually only one, that being Chthon the Far Watcher. This is a 2-power, 2/3 unit requiring 1 Justice and 1 Primal Influence to play. He has Endurance, and an ultimate where you pay 6 to give Chthon flying and play a 4/4 Owl with flying. This is definitely one of the best 2-drops in the game. Almost every Hooru deck up to this point plays this card. It's overall the best target for Hooru's mentor mechanic currently, thanks to the Endurance, which will keep Chthon up as a blocker on your opponent's turn, and thanks to Chthon's low cost of 2 power. Even 3-color decks like Chalice Control and the more experimental Justice Primal Shadow control decks have played this card, with most of those lists still continuing to play it. If you plan to build a Hooru deck, crafting 4 of these is a good move. Chthon is a card you generally want to run 4 copies of in a deck, although there are always exceptions. I'd go as far as saying that this is the safest legendary to craft on this list. Let's move on to the optional legendaries. There's quite a few, but most of these have been found in Hooru control decks in previous metagames. So I want to talk about those legendaries together first, and then we'll move into talking about the rest of the optional legendaries in this section. So the first 2 I want to talk about are Martial Ironthorn and Leave a Witness. And let's touch on Martial Ironthorn first. This is a 5-power, 5/5 unit requiring 2 Justice Influence to play. When Empower is activated, you play an additional copy of that power, and he also has an ultimate where you pay 15 to kill all enemy units. This one used to be found in a few Hooru control lists over Throne Warden. I'll go ahead and say that Throne Warden is by far more popular and is almost the definitive 5-drop for the deck, just because it works so well at transitioning you into the late game, unlike Martial Ironthorn. But Ironthorn has applications. It's a slightly bigger body and can help ramp you into your late game cards faster, like Channel the Tempest, or allow you to play your 7-cost dragons on turn 6. Like Rhymescale Draconis or Mistveil Drake if you run them. The ultimate can matter as an extra board clear beyond Harsh Rule. It can allow you to run higher cost win conditions like Ada the Hooru, theoretically, or at least if you really want to be greedy, but Hooru control generally doesn't need to run stuff that costs more than Channel. I would only craft this card if you want to experiment, as Throne Warden is better in almost every way. But if you've got the Shift Stones, crafting 3 of these should be plenty. So next, let's touch on Leave a Witness. This is a 7-power spell requiring 3 Justice Influence to play. You kill all units, and this has Mentor, where you also spare the student. This one, I'm admittedly going off of pure theory. It's the same situation as Big Combrei. The only reason to really run this is if you want a 5th copy of Harsh Rule. But between Harsh Rule and Lightning Storm, you should have plenty of board wipes though. It is always possible you can run this as a sideboard card for tournaments, but you generally don't need it for Hooru control. You can craft a single copy of this if you really want to, or if you've got the shift stone to do it and don't need any other legendary in particular. So the next two cards I want to talk about are Rhymescale Draconis and Sword of the Sky King. So let's talk about Rhymescale Draconis first. This is a 7-power 7/6 unit requiring 2 primal influence to play. It has flying, and when it comes into play, you play permafrost on each exhausted enemy unit. So this dragon used to show up on occasion in a few Hooru control lists before Omens of the Past came out. I haven't really seen it ran since then, but that's more because of the fact that you don't really see Hooru control that much. I personally think this card is underrated. It can act as that 5th harsh rule, though granted it's pretty situational, and it doesn't work at all against endurance units, namely Sandstorm Titan. Though this can fight one and live. When this was in Hooru control, players typically ran a single copy of this card, so that's the amount I would start with as far as crafting them goes. So next we have Sword of the Sky King, an 8-power 8/8 relic weapon requiring 2 Justice influence to play. Yet another card that some people ran on occasion in their Hooru control decks before Omens of the Past came out. But once again, the deck is a rare sighting these days, and Channel the Tempest is generally the more acceptable win condition since it draws you cards. This card tends to get forgotten about, but it's somewhat justified. It can kill a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it lacks some flexibility in that it will always do 8 damage, but it can't go face unless the board is clear, unlike Channel the Tempest. Like Leave a Witness, if you've got the Shift Stone, you want to experiment, and you don't need any other legendaries in particular, you can craft a single copy of this. So finally, let's talk about 2 optional legendaries that are not found in Hooru control. Those being Pearlescent Drake and Ada the Hooru. And each of these are found in different decks. But let's talk about Pearlescent Drake first. This is a 5-power 6/3 unit requiring 3 primal influence to play. It has flying and reckless, and when Spark activates, and this comes into play with +4 health. So I mentioned this legendary in my Feln video, and when I talked about the card there, I said that there were other decks this card was starting to find success in. Well, I finally get to mention that in this video. The one Hooru deck you will find this card in is Sir Rhino's Pearlescent Hooru deck. For those that don't know, it's a mid-range deck that seeks to win the game via flying units, particularly around turns 4 through 7, since that's when the deck's biggest flyers, Shelter Wing Rider and Pearlescent Drake, come online and start attacking in. The early game flying units are how the deck activates Pearlescent Drake, and it runs Protect in order to keep its units from being removed. This is the only deck so far that Hooru has utilized Pearlescent Drake in. The deck runs the full 4 copies of the card, so that's the amount I would craft if you're looking to play that deck. Finally, let's talk about Ada the Hooru. This is a 12-power spell requiring 2 Justice and 2 Primal Influence to play. You stun each enemy unit, play 2 4/4 owls with flying, draw 4 cards, and gain 4 armor. I never thought this card would make any list as far as what legendaries are worth crafting, even after the small buff it got in a recent patch. A 12 cost is astronomically high, even if this card helps you stabilize in the late game. However, there is one 3-color deck out there that utilizes this card and is somewhat popular, and that is Owl Ramp. It's a deck that utilizes power acceleration in order to play certain cards earlier than normal. In this case, Ada the Hooru. Manues popularized the deck a few weeks back, and his list also uses Mystic Ascendant for more late game punch in combination with Martial Ironthorn. I've seen other lists experiment with Channel the Tempest as well, but I can't really speak on the success of that card in Owl Ramp. Anyway, if you're looking to build that particular deck, crafting 3 copies of this card is the way to go. It is a pretty cool deck. Finally, we get to the section of this guide where I talk about a few legendaries that you should not craft, but instead you should keep in your back pocket, as these legendaries, although they're not really played now, they have the potential of seeing use in a particular deck. So the 2 cards I want to mention are Watcher of the Big Ones and Nostrix Lord of Visions. Let's start with Watcher of the Big Ones. This is a 4 power 3/6 unit requiring 2 primal influence to play. When Watcher of the Big Ones is a student, play a 5/5 Carnosaur. There's pretty much no debate that this is a good card, and this used to cost 5, though granted, it also used to have 4 strength back then as well. The problem is that it's a good card in a group of cards that have what seems to be the weakest mechanic in Omens of the Past, Mentor. Losing an attacker on your turn and a blocker on your opponent's next turn is huge. I've always said any Mentor effect that gets printed has to have a huge impact on the game, enough to where it makes up for that big tempo loss. This comes close. You at least get a 5/5 body to block with when you Mentor this. If mid-range or control decks with a Mentor sub-theme ever get popular, this card has a decent chance of being in that type of deck, so I'd keep an eye on this one. And finally, let's talk about Nostrix, Lord of Visions. This is a 6 power 5/7 unit requiring 3 Justice and 3 Primal Influence to play. He has flying and a Mentor ability where you give the student and each other copy in your hand and deck +3/+3. Very powerful unit. Excellent stat line for a 6-drop. Has evasion in the form of flying, and the Mentor effect is very strong for a mid-range strategy. Unfortunately, Nostrix is in the same situation as Watcher of the Big Ones. Powerful card attached to a seemingly weak mechanic. I've already mentioned my thoughts on Mentor itself, so I won't repeat myself again. I'll just say to keep an eye on this card as well, in case a mid-range deck utilizing Mentor ever finds its legs. That's it for the Hooru portion of the Legendary Crafting Guide. If you're just starting out, let me know if these videos have been helpful to you. Hopefully I've pointed you guys in the right direction. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. If you have any suggestions or just general feedback, let me know in the comment section below. Also, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future videos, not just for this series, but for the other Eternal content I put out as well. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.